I've been working at the Hoover Dam for 12 years now. That's a long time to spend inside a mountain of concrete, longer than most people stay, longer than I ever planned to. But there's something about this place that gets into your bones, a rhythm in the hum of the turbines, and the drip of water through the walls that becomes a kind of music. You learn to read it, to feel it in your chest. You learn the sounds and the silences, the way the air moves through the tunnels and the way the light falls in the caverns. I know every tunnel, every catwalk, every access shaft in that massive concrete structure. I know the maintenance corridors that are marked on the blueprints and the ones that aren't. I know the rooms that are supposed to exist and the ones that are supposed to have been sealed off and forgotten. I thought I knew everything. But there's one elevator that isn't on any map. It's tucked away in a maintenance corridor on the Nevada side, behind a door that's supposed to be locked. I'd walked past that door 100 times. Maybe 1,000, and I'd never given it a second thought. It was just another door in a long hallway of doors, its surface painted the same dull gray as the walls. Its handle worn smooth by the hands of workers who had long since retired or died. But one night, I noticed something different. The lock was broken. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack. Just enough to let a sliver of darkness leak out into the corridor. I should have walked away. That's the rule. The rule is simple. If the elevator door's open and there's no one inside, you don't get in. You don't even look at it for too long. I knew that rule. Everyone knows that rule. It's one of the first things they tell you when you start working here. But that night, I was tired. I'd been on my feet for 16 hours. Checking turbine readings and inspecting valves, and my mind was fogged with fatigue. The rule slipped away, lost in the haze of exhaustion. I pushed the door open. The corridor beyond was narrow. Barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side, and the air was cold, carrying a faint, metallic smell that I couldn't place. The walls were rough concrete, unpainted. And the floor was covered in a fine layer of dust that muffled my footsteps. I walked to the end of the corridor, and there it was, the elevator. The doors were old, made of heavy steel, their surface streaked with rust and grime. They slid open without a sound, revealing a small, dimly lit car. The light inside was a sickly yellow, flickering faintly, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The car was empty. I should have walked away. I should have turned around and gone back to my post and pretended I'd never seen that door. But I didn't. I stepped inside. The door slid shut behind me, sealing me in with a soft, final hiss. The elevator started to descend. It went down past the turbine floors. I could feel the familiar vibration of the massive generators through the walls, the deep, rhythmic thrum that was the heartbeat of the dam. But the vibration faded. Replaced by a silence that was deeper and more absolute. The elevator continued to descend, past the maintenance levels, past the drainage tunnels, past anything I'd ever seen on the blueprints. The numbers on the indicator panel flickered and changed, but they didn't correspond to any floor I recognized. The car was moving faster now, the air growing colder. The walls outside the small window becoming a blur of dark concrete and shadow. I pressed the button for the main level, but nothing happened. I pressed the emergency stop, but the elevator kept going. I was trapped, descending into the heart of the mountain. And then, without warning, the elevator stopped. The door slid open, and I was looking out onto a corridor that stretched into darkness. The corridor was wide. Its walls lined with doors, heavy doors made of wood and iron, their surfaces carved with symbols that I didn't recognize. The doors looked old, older than the dam itself, older than anything that was supposed to be down here. The air was cold and dry, carrying a faint, dusty smell like the inside of a tomb. I stepped out of the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I walked down the corridor, my hand brushing against the rough surface of the walls, and I felt something that made my blood run cold. The walls were warm. They were vibrating, just slightly, as if something was moving behind them, something vast and alive. I stopped at one of the doors. The symbols carved into its surface were worn, their edges softened by time. I reached out and touched one, and the door swung open. Inside there was a room, a small, empty room with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a faint yellowish glow. There was nothing in the room except a chair and a desk, and on the desk a single piece of paper. I walked to the desk and picked up the paper. It was a list of names, written in a hand that was shaky and uneven. Some of the names I recognized, men who had worked at the dam and disappeared. Others were unfamiliar. At the bottom of the list, in a different hand, was a single word: waiting. I dropped the paper and ran back to the elevator. The doors were still open, the car still waiting. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the main level. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began to rise. It rose without stopping, passing floors and levels that I couldn't identify. The numbers on the panel flickering too fast to read. The air grew warmer, the familiar hum of the turbines returning, and when the doors finally opened, I was back on my floor. I stepped out into the corridor, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. The door to the maintenance corridor was closed, and when I tried the handle, it was locked. I never told anyone what I saw. I couldn't. Who would believe me? The elevator doesn't appear on any map. The corridor doesn't exist. The names on that piece of paper belong to men who vanished, men whose disappearances were chalked up to accidents or desertion. But I know the truth. They didn't vanish. They went down, into the heart of the dam, into the place that wasn't supposed to be there, and they never came back. Sometimes, when I'm working late and the dam is quiet, I hear it. The elevator descending. I can feel it in the floor. A faint vibration that travels through the concrete and up into my bones. I know it's coming for me. I know that one night when I'm tired, when my mind is fogged with exhaustion, I'll find that door open again. And I'll step inside. I don't know what's down there in the dark, in the warmth behind those ancient doors. But I know it's waiting. It's always waiting. And one day, I'll go back down and I won't come back up. There are miles of tunnels inside the Hoover Dam. I don't mean the ones the tourists see, the polished corridors with their handrails and explanatory plaques. I mean the real ones. The ones carved into the living rock before the concrete was ever poured. The passageways that were blasted out by men who worked in conditions that would get a company shut down today. Those tunnels are dark and narrow. And they go deep, deeper than most people can imagine. I've been in most of them. After 12 years, you learn the layout, the way the tunnels branch and connect, the way they wind through the mountain like veins through a body. Most of them are on the official maps. They're numbered and logged, their dimensions and conditions recorded in dusty files that sit in the archives. But there's one that isn't. I found it by accident. And I've never been able to forget it. It was a routine inspection. That's what they call it, when you have to go down into the lower levels and make sure the drainage systems are working. That the water isn't seeping through the concrete in places it shouldn't. The lower levels of the dam are a maze of pipes and valves. Their surface is slick with condensation, the air cold and damp. The sound of the turbines is muffled down there, a distant roar that fades to a low rhythmic thrum. I was checking a pressure gauge on a spillway valve when I noticed something I'd never seen before. A narrow opening, barely wide enough to squeeze through, tucked behind a tangle of pipes and conduits. It looked like a crack in the rock, a fissure that had been opened by the shifting of the mountain. I shone my flashlight into it. And the beam disappeared into darkness. I should have walked away. The old-timers had told me about it, about a tunnel that wasn't on any map, a place you didn't go. They'd said it leads to a cavity that was there before the dam was built, a space the engineers sealed off and forgot about. I'd laughed it off back then. I thought it was just a story. The kind of thing you tell the new guys to keep them from wandering off. But standing there in the cold, damp darkness, looking into that narrow shaft, I remembered the look in their eyes. They weren't joking. I squeezed through the opening. The rocks scraped against my shoulders, and I had to turn sideways to fit. The tunnel beyond was narrow, barely wide enough to walk through, its walls rough and uneven, the ceiling low enough that I had to stoop. The air was cold, colder than the rest of the dam, and it carried a smell I couldn't identify. It was faint, like dust and old stone, but there was something else beneath it. Something metallic and sharp. The sound of the turbines faded as I moved deeper into the tunnel, replaced by a silence that was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, the thud of my heart, the scrape of my boots on the rock. I shone my flashlight ahead of me, but the beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, as if the tunnel was absorbing the light. I took a few more steps, and I felt something change. The air grew colder and the silence deepened, pressing against my ears like a weight. I stopped and listened, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing. Just the silence and the darkness and the faint smell of metal. I turned to go back, and I couldn't find the entrance. The tunnel behind me was the same as the tunnel ahead, narrow and dark and featureless. I walked back, my hand brushing against the wall, looking for the opening I'd come through. It wasn't there. The wall was solid, unbroken rock. I was lost. I walked in one direction, then the other, but the tunnel didn't seem to have an end. It just stretched on, winding through the rock, its walls unchanging. The flashlight beam flickered and I realized the batteries were dying. I started to panic. My breath came faster, my heart hammering in my chest. I walked faster, then broke into a jog, then a run. My footsteps echoing in the silence. The tunnel twisted and turned, and I couldn't tell if I was going deeper or climbing back toward the surface. I just ran, driven by fear, by the desperate need to find a way out. I don't know how long I wandered. It felt like hours. My legs ached and my lungs burned, and the flashlight was barely more than a dim glow. I stumbled and fell, and when I got up, I saw something. A door. A heavy steel door set into the rock, its surface pitted with rust. Its handle, a heavy iron wheel like the ones you'd find on a submarine. I reached out and grabbed the wheel, and it turned with a groan of metal on metal. The door swung open, and I stepped through into a familiar corridor. I was back in the main part of the dam. The turbines hummed, and the air was warm, and the lights were bright. I stood there for a long moment, catching my breath, my mind reeling. I looked back at the door, and it was gone. Just a blank wall of concrete, unbroken and solid. I never told anyone what I saw. I couldn't. I know what they'd think. They'd say I got lost. That I wandered into a drainage tunnel and found my way out. They'd say it was just a trick of the darkness, a panic-induced hallucination. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That silence, so deep and absolute. Pressing against my ears. That cold, metallic smell. The feeling that something was watching me from the darkness, something vast and patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. I still dream about that tunnel. In the dreams, I'm running, my legs heavy, my lungs burning, the darkness pressing in from all sides. And there's a presence behind me, something that's following, something that's always there, just out of sight. I wake up in a cold sweat. My heart pounding, and I can still feel it. The weight of that silence, the memory of that cold metallic smell. I don't go near the lower levels anymore. I don't do inspections in the spillway tunnels. I find ways to avoid it. Excuses to stay on the upper levels where the lights are bright and the sound of the turbines is a comfort. But I know the tunnel is still there. I know the door is still there, hidden behind the concrete, waiting. And sometimes, when the dam is quiet, I can feel it. The faint vibration of something moving in the darkness, something that knows my name. The Hoover Dam is covered in markings. That's something most people don't realize when they walk across the top, looking down at the water in the valley below. They see the smooth, curved face of the concrete, the Art Deco towers, the gleaming brass and polished stone of the visitor center. But underneath all that, in the places where the public doesn't go, the dam is a canvas. Inspection stamps, structural codes, the faded signatures of the men who built it. All of them are scratched and painted and stamped into the concrete. It's a record of the dam's history, a palimpsest of the thousands of workers who passed through these tunnels and corridors over the decades. I've spent 12 years reading those markings, learning to interpret them. I know what the different stamps mean, what the codes refer to, whose signatures are worth noticing. But there's one marking that doesn't fit. A three-digit number painted in faded white paint that appears in places it shouldn't be. In the stairwells, on the turbine housings, on the inside of access panels that haven't been opened in decades. It's always the same number, always the same faded, peeling paint. And the rule is simple. If you see that number, you don't touch it, you don't erase it, you don't write over it, you just leave it alone. I learned that rule early on, during my first week on the job. An old maintenance man named Frank had taken me on a tour of the lower levels, showing me the valves and the pipes and the drainage systems. We were walking through a narrow corridor, the walls close on either side, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and oil. I was trying to memorize the layout, to keep track of the turns and the intersections, when I noticed a mark on the wall. It was a number I painted in faded white paint, its edges blurred and worn. I stopped and looked at it, trying to read it. Frank grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. "Don't touch that," he said, his voice low and serious. Don't look at it too long. Just keep walking." I asked him what it meant, what the number was for. He didn't answer at first. He just walked faster, his footsteps echoing in the silence. When we were out of the corridor, he stopped and turned to face me. "That number was left by a crew that went missing during the construction," he said. "They were working on a section of the dam that wasn't on any blueprints. A part of the project that was classified and forgotten. They left that number as a marker, a way to find their way back. But they never came back. They're still down there somewhere, in a part of the dam that doesn't exist anymore." I didn't believe him. I thought he was just telling me a story, trying to scare the new guy. But the look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. I forgot about the number, for a while. There was too much else to learn, too many other things to worry about. I'd see it sometimes in a stairwell or on the side of a turbine housing, and I'd remember Frank's words. But I'd always look away and keep walking. It was easy to dismiss it as just another piece of the dam's history, a relic of a time when things were done differently. But then I started noticing it in places where it shouldn't be. Access panels that hadn't been opened in decades, panels that were welded shut, would have the number painted on their inside surfaces. You'd open a panel to check a valve, and there it would be, that same faded number, waiting for you in the darkness. I asked other workers about it, older ones, the ones who had been at the dam for decades. They all gave me the same answer: don't touch it, don't look at it too long, leave it alone. I pressed one of them, a grizzled old electrician named Joe, and he told me the story Frank had told me. The crew, the missing workers, the part of the dam that didn't exist. But he added something else. He said that sometimes, late at night, when the dam was quiet and the turbines were running low, you could hear them. The missing crew, still hammering, still working, trapped in that forgotten part of the dam. He said he'd heard it himself. The rhythmic sound of a hammer on stone, coming from deep within the walls. I didn't believe him, but I started to listen. On the late shifts, when the dam was empty and the only sound was the hum of the turbines, I'd strain my ears trying to hear something. At first, there was nothing. Just the familiar sounds of the dam, the machinery and the water and the distant groan of the concrete settling. But then one night, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, coming from the direction of a tunnel that I knew wasn't on any map. It was barely audible, just a whisper of sound, but it was unmistakable. A hammer striking stone. I stood there, frozen, listening. The tapping continued, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. I felt a chill run down my spine, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the tunnel. I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself it was just the settling of the dam, the shifting of the rock, the movement of water through the pipes. I told myself it was my imagination, the product of too many late nights and too many stories. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The tapping continued, night after night, always from the same direction, always the same rhythm. I started to dread the late shifts, the hours when the dam was quiet and the darkness pressed in from all sides. I'd find myself avoiding certain corridors, certain tunnels, certain areas of the dam that I knew I'd have to pass through. And then, yesterday, I saw the number again. I was doing an inspection of a drainage tunnel, a narrow shaft that ran beneath the turbine floor. I was checking the pipe joints, shining my flashlight along the walls, when I saw it. The number, painted on the wall of the tunnel in that same faded white paint. But this time it wasn't just on the wall. It was on the floor, leading into the darkness like a trail of breadcrumbs. I shone my flashlight along the tunnel and I saw another number and another, each one leading deeper into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, my hand gripping the flashlight, and then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back, I didn't follow the numbers. I just walked, as fast as I could, back to the main part of the dam. I'm writing this now, sitting in the break room, waiting for my shift to end. The dam is quiet, the turbine's running low, and I can hear it. The hammering. It's coming from the walls, from the floor, from the darkness that presses in on all sides. It's louder than it was before, more insistent. I can hear the rhythm of it, slow, steady, like a heartbeat. I know it's the crew. The missing crew, still working, still trapped, still trying to find their way back. And I know, with a certainty that I can't explain, that they're not just hammering. They're calling for me. I don't know what they want. I don't know if they're trying to warn me or trying to find their way out. But I know that the numbers are there, leading into the darkness, and that one night, I'm going to follow them. I'm going to see where they lead, and I'm not sure I'm going to come back. There's a rule at the Hoover Dam that everyone knows. It's one of the first things they tell you when you start working here, right after they show you where to park and how to clock in. The rule is simple. If you see water flowing in a place where it shouldn't be, you don't touch it, you don't test it, you don't report it, you just walk away. I didn't understand it at first. I thought it was just another piece of the company's arcane bureaucracy, another rule designed to protect them from liability. But after 12 years, I've learned to follow it without question. The dam is a living thing, a mass of concrete and steel that shifts and breathes and leaks. There are places where water seeps through the walls, where moisture beads on the surface of the rock. Most of it is harmless, part of the natural flow of the river that the dam was built to control. But some of it isn't. Some of it comes from places that don't make sense, places that shouldn't exist. I was doing a routine inspection of the lower levels, checking the drainage pipes that run beneath the turbine floor. It's a job I've done 100 times a year, for the better part of a decade. I know those pipes, the way they curve and branch, the way the water flows through them when the dam is running at full capacity. I was shining my flashlight along the concrete walls, looking for cracks or signs of wear, when I saw it, a trickle of water, seeping through a crack in the concrete. It was thin, barely more than a film of moisture, but it was moving. It was flowing from the direction of a section of the dam that had been sealed off decades ago. The area was supposed to be inaccessible, a relic of the dam's construction that had been walled up and forgotten. I should have walked away. The rule was clear. But there was something about that trickle of water that caught my attention, something that made me pause. It was too clear, too clean, as if it had come from a source that hadn't been touched by the river or the turbines. I followed it. The trickle led me through a maze of narrow corridors, past pipes and valves and conduits that were covered in dust and cobwebs. The air grew colder, the light from the overhead fixtures dimmer. The sound of the turbines faded, replaced by a silence that was absolute. I was moving deeper into the dam, into a part of it that I'd never seen before. The walls changed, the smooth concrete giving way to rough, unfinished rock. The trickle of water continued, a thin, glistening thread that seemed to glow in the beam of my flashlight. It led me to a door. It was a heavy steel door, its surface pitted with rust, its hinges dark with age. It was supposed to be welded shut. I could see the remnants of the weld, the rough patches of metal where the torch had been applied. But the weld was broken, the metal cracked and twisted, as if something had forced the door open from the inside. The door was ajar, just a crack, just enough to let a sliver of darkness leak out. I pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, the sound loud in the silence. I stepped through and I found myself in a room. It was a large, empty chamber, its walls rough and unfinished, its ceiling lost in darkness. The room wasn't on any of the blueprints. I knew that with a certainty that settled in my stomach like a stone. The walls were covered in a dark, slimy growth, a film of black that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight. The floor was slick with water. A thin layer of liquid that reflected the dim glow of my light. The room smelled of dampness and decay, a faint organic scent that made my nose wrinkle. In the center of the room there was a pool. It was a perfect circle of black water, its surface as still and reflective as a mirror. The water was so dark that it seemed to have no depth, no dimension, as if it was a portal into a void that had no bottom. I walked toward the pool, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The water was perfectly still, undisturbed by any current or movement. I shone my flashlight into it, and the beam was reflected back, a distorted image of the room above. I leaned over the edge, my breath held, my heart pounding, and I looked into the water. I saw something move. It was deep, deeper than the room could possibly be. A darkness that stretched down into an abyss. And there was something down there, something that was looking back at me. I didn't see a face or a shape, not in the way that you'd recognize a face or a shape. It was a presence, a weight, a sense that I was being watched by something that was vast and ancient and patient. The water rippled, a subtle disturbance that broke the stillness of the surface. I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. Running felt like an admission, a surrender to the fear that was clawing at the edges of my sanity. I walked out of the room, through the door, back into the corridor. I closed the door behind me and I didn't look back. I followed the trickle of water back through the narrow corridors, past the pipes and the valves, until I emerged into the familiar light and sound of the main dam. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. I couldn't. The rule was clear. If you see water flowing in a place where it shouldn't be, you don't touch it. You don't test it, you don't report it, you just walk away. I had walked away, but I couldn't forget what I'd seen. I go back to that room sometimes, not physically, not in my body. I'm too afraid for that. But in my mind, in the quiet hours of the night, when the dam is silent and the only sound is the distant hum of the turbines, I find myself standing at the edge of that pool. I look into the water and I see the darkness, deep and endless. And I know that there's something down there, something that knows my name, something that's been there longer than the dam, longer than the river, longer than anything that could be measured or understood. I feel it. A presence that presses against the edges of my consciousness, a weight that settles in my chest and makes it hard to breathe. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's there, but I know that it's waiting. And I know that one day I'll go back. I'll push open that door again. I'll walk to the edge of that pool, and I'll look into the water, and the water will look back at me, and I won't be able to walk away. The Hoover Dam runs 24 hours a day, 3 shifts around the clock. The first shift is day, the second is evening, and the third is the graveyard shift, the one that runs from midnight to 8 in the morning. I've been working the third shift for 5 years now. It suits me, the solitude, the quiet hours when the dam is empty and the only sounds are the hum of the turbines and the distant drip of water through the concrete. There's a rhythm to the night shift, a kind of peace that you don't find during the day when the corridors are filled with workers and the air is thick with the noise of maintenance and inspection. At night, the dam is still. The lights are dimmed and the shadows are long, and you feel like you're the only person in the world. But there's a rule. The rule is simple. On the third shift, you don't go into the turbine room alone. You don't work in the lower levels by yourself. You don't look into the shadows. It's one of the first things they tell you when you're assigned to the graveyard shift, and it's one of the rules you learn to follow without question. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was just another piece of the company's superstition, a story they told to keep the night workers from wandering off or falling asleep on the job. But I've been here long enough to know that the rule exists for a reason. I've heard the stories, the ones the old-timers tell when they think no one is listening. The stories about the men who built the dam. The ones who died in the tunnels and the caverns. The ones whose bodies were never recovered. They say that sometimes, late at night, you can see them walking through the corridors, still carrying their tools, still wearing the clothes they wore when they were alive. I didn't believe it. Not until last week. I was on the third shift, like I have been for 5 years. It was a quiet night, the dam running at half capacity. The turbine spinning at a low hum. I was in the control room, checking the gauges, when I noticed that one of the pressure readings was off. It was a minor deviation, nothing that would trigger an alarm. But it was enough to warrant a physical check. I had to go down to the turbine room to verify the reading. The turbine room is one of the largest spaces in the dam. A cavernous chamber that houses the massive generators that convert the force of the river into electricity. The room is filled with the roar of the turbines. A sound that vibrates through the floor and the walls and settles in your bones. It's a sound that's so loud, so constant, that it becomes a kind of silence, a white noise that fills your ears and drowns out everything else. I walked through the heavy steel door that leads into the turbine room, and the sound hit me like a wave. The room was dark, lit only by the dim glow of the emergency lights and the faint blue glow of the turbine housings. The massive generators loomed on either side of me, their surfaces slick with condensation, their metal skins warm to the touch. I walked along the catwalk, my footsteps echoing in the roar, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. I found the pressure gauge I was looking for, checked the reading, and confirmed that it was within acceptable limits. I turned to leave, and that's when I felt it. A presence, a weight in the air, a shift in the darkness. I stopped and listened, my breath held, my heart pounding. The turbines roared around me, their sound filling every corner of the room. But beneath the roar I heard something else, a footstep, a soft, deliberate sound, like a boot on concrete. I turned, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, and I saw him. A figure standing in the shadows just beyond the reach of the light. He was a man tall and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. The kind that construction workers used to wear in the 1930s. A worn canvas jacket, a pair of heavy work pants, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. He was just standing there, his hands at his sides, his head tilted slightly, as if he was studying me. I blinked, and he was gone. The space where he had been standing was empty, the shadows undisturbed. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the spinning turbines. I told myself it was my imagination, the product of too many late nights and too many stories. I finished my check and walked back to the control room, my footsteps quick and purposeful, my eyes fixed on the path ahead. I didn't look back. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I knew what they'd say. They'd tell me it was nothing, a figment of my tired mind. They'd tell me to get some rest, to take a break. But I know what I saw. I know he was there. I've been back to the turbine room since then. I've had to, for my job. But I don't go alone anymore. I wait for someone else to be on the shift, or I find an excuse to delay the inspection until the day crew arrives. I can't bring myself to go back into that room by myself. The presence is still there. I can feel it. A weight in the air, a shift in the darkness, a sense that I'm being watched. Sometimes, when the turbines are loud and the shadows are deep, I can see him standing in the corner of my eye, just out of sight. I I catch a glimpse of him, a flash of canvas and denim, the brim of a hat, the pale outline of a face. And then he's gone, swallowed by the darkness and the roar of the machines. I don't know who he is. I don't know why he's there. But I know he's been there longer than I have. He was there before the dam was finished, before the water rose, before the turbines started to spin. He's part of the dam now, part of the concrete and the steel and the darkness. And sometimes when the third shift is quiet and the dam is empty, I can feel him watching me, waiting. I know he's not done with me. I know that one day I'll turn around and he'll be there, standing in the shadows, his head tilted, his eyes fixed on mine, and I won't be able to look away. There's a door at the bottom of the Hoover Dam. It's a heavy steel door, set into the concrete wall of a drainage tunnel that hasn't been used in decades. The door is old, its surface pitted with rust, its handle a heavy iron wheel that's frozen in place by years of corrosion. I've passed that door 1,000 times over the 12 years I've worked at the dam. It's always been closed, always been sealed. A silent reminder of a time when the dam was younger and the tunnels were still in use. The rule is simple. You don't open that door. You don't even go near it. It's one of the first things they tell you when you start working at the dam, and it's one of the rules you learn to follow without question. I've never seen that door open. I've never wanted to. I've always walked past it. My eyes fixed on the path ahead, my mind on other things. But last week, that changed. I was doing a routine inspection of the lower levels, checking the drainage pipes and the pressure valves. It was a late shift. The dam quiet and still. The only sound the distant hum of the turbines and the steady drip of water through the concrete. I was walking along the corridor that leads to the drainage tunnel, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. When I saw it, the door was open. Just a crack, a sliver of darkness that seemed to pull at the light. I stopped and stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd never seen the door open before. I didn't think it could open. The handle was frozen, the hinges rusted, the seal unbroken for as long as anyone could remember. But there it was, a crack of darkness, a sliver of the unknown. I should have walked away. I should have reported it and let someone else deal with it. But I didn't. I was curious. I'd been working at the dam for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. I thought I knew every tunnel, every corridor, every dark and forgotten corner. But that door, that open door, was something new, something I didn't understand. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I reached the door and pushed it open. It groaned on its hinges, a sound like metal scraping against metal, a sound that seemed to echo through the darkness. The corridor beyond was dark, darker than any place I'd ever been. The darkness was absolute. A void that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. I stepped through the door and into the tunnel. The air was cold, colder than the rest of the dam, and it carried a smell that I couldn't identify. It was damp and earthy, like the smell of soil after a rain, but there was something else beneath it, something metallic and sharp. I shone my flashlight down the tunnel, and the beam disappeared into the darkness. The tunnel stretched on, endless and empty. Its walls rough and uneven, its floor slick with moisture. I could hear something moving in the darkness, a sound like water dripping, like footsteps on wet stone. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. I stood there for a long moment, my flashlight trembling in my hand, listening to that sound, and then I closed the door and walked away. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I couldn't. Who would believe me? The door had been closed for decades, sealed by rust and time. There was no way it could have opened on its own. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I've been back to that door since then. I've walked past it a dozen times. 100 times, always with the same result. It's closed. It's always closed, the handle frozen, the seal unbroken. But I know it was open. I know I stepped through it. I know I stood in that tunnel. Listening to the sound of something moving in the darkness. And I know, with a certainty that I can't explain, that the door is still open. Not physically, not in a way that anyone else could see, but in a way that matters. in a way that I can feel in my bones. The door is open and it's waiting. Sometimes when I'm working late and the dam is quiet, I can feel it calling me. It's not a sound, not in the way that you'd hear a sound. It's a presence, a weight in the air, a pull that I can't quite explain. I'll be walking along a corridor, my mind on my work, and I'll feel it, a tug at the edges of my consciousness, a whisper of something that I can't quite make out. I'll find myself walking toward the lower levels, my feet moving on their own, carrying me toward that door. I always catch myself in time. I always stop and turn around, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. But I know it's there. I know it's waiting. And I know that one day I'm not going to catch myself. I'm going to walk down to that door, push it open, and step through into the darkness. I'm going to follow that tunnel. Follow the sound of water dripping and footsteps on wet stone. I'm going to see where it leads. And I'm not sure I'm going to come back. I've told myself it's just my imagination. I've told myself it's the stress of the job. The long hours, the isolation of the graveyard shift. I've told myself that the door was never really open, that I imagined the whole thing. But I can't shake the feeling that something is down there. Something that was there before the dam was built. Something that was sealed away when the concrete was poured. Something that has been waiting, patient and silent, for the door to open. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's real. I felt it in that tunnel, in the darkness. I felt it watching me. I felt it waiting. And I know that it's still there, still waiting, still calling. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can see it. A shape in the darkness, a presence at the edge of my vision. It's formless, shapeless, a weight in the air. But it's there, and it's getting closer. I don't know how much longer I can resist. I don't know how much longer I can walk past that door without pushing it open. But I know that when I do, when I finally give in, I won't be coming back. I'll be part of the darkness, part of the silence. Part of the thing that waits at the bottom of the dam. And the door will close behind me, and I'll be forgotten, just like the others.